My name is Anishka, and I'm going to review the movie Sandakan No. 8, directed by Kei Kumai in 1974. The movie is based on a book by Tomoko Yamazaki and deals with the topic of the so-called Karayuki-san that had been problematic in the Japanese society. So let's discuss why. If we wanted to translate the term Karayuki-san, it would be Miss or Mr. who went abroad. And originally it was referring to migrants of both sexes who went abroad to work. Later on, it became relevant only to girls and women who were smuggled to become prostitutes in East and Southeast Asian regions, like for example Manchuria, Shanghai, Hong Kong, but also Philippines, Indonesia, and there are also cases of women being sent to Australia and North America. These Karayuki-san girls were often from poor farming regions of Japan, for example Amakusa in Kumamoto, as we have seen in the movie, and therefore made really easy targets. They also often had low social status, the so-called burakumin. Burakumin were the untouchables who were taking care of filthy professions like butchers or undertakers, and their whole families were considered as outcasts of the society. In the movie, we can also see a lot of references to Christianity.
今から3年ほど前のこと。
And I have seen Christian symbols in another film by Kei Kumai. So either he really likes it or he wants to show us that at this time Christians were still a thorn in Japan's side and were discriminated. But was the exploitation of females' bodies worth it? Well, for Japanese economy, yes, as it profited greatly. As Okiku puts it,
そうじゃなかか。お前は陰梅の生き血は吸うてそぎゃ不当なったぞ。
in addition, the Japanese considered foreigners as inferior, and having a sexual intercourse with them meant a great deal of shame and distanced the Karayuki-san even more from what's considered as normality. But with Karayuki-san, it has only just begun. During the World War II, there were the so-called comfort women, who were prisoners of war from countries Japan was occupying, for example Korea or the Philippines. They encountered even more harsh conditions, and their stories are truly horrifying. Some of them are still alive, and I highly recommend watching some interviews with them. What strikes me the most is the fact that they were/are still considered outcasts in their own societies. On the question, why did she hesitate so long to share her story, a Filipino comfort woman survivor answers, "If Filipinos find out you were raped, they start to think really lowly of you." Let's start with Osaki, played by Kinuyo Tanaka. Osaki as a child is initiative, and she's willing to take a step into the unknown in order to provide financial support for her family. She loves her mother very much, and we can see how deeply gratefulness is rooted in her as she takes care of the kimono, the only thing her mother was able to give her. Even when Osaki is old and she doesn't have a lot of things, she still has this kimono cloth. We can only speculate how would Osaki's mother react to her when she comes back from Borneo. But based on my research and on the interviews I have seen, a mother is able to understand but is not willing to stand up for her daughter because she feels ashamed to. When Osaki finds out that the pimp wants her to be a prostitute, she fights really hard against him. She is outstanding between all of those girls, but she also gets beaten up the worst. We can compare this scene to the scene where Keiko is almost raped, and we can notice that both of these girls are willing to fight for themselves because they don't want to get exploited like that. But unlike Osaki, Keiko is able to succeed and even manages to scare the men away, which can mean that the times have changed and men have no longer control over women's bodies. Women can have a say in what happens to them, but since these times, feminism still has a long way to go. When it comes to foreigners, Osaki makes a clear statement that she does not distinguish between them and Japanese. Kei Kumai said in an interview from the 90s that during World War II, he witnessed discrimination on non-Japanese nations, and this could be expression of his opinion. When Osaki returns to Japan, she realizes there are other things much more important to her than money, such as the sense of acceptance, belonging somewhere, and forming connections with others. That's why when Keiko wants to give her money, she refuses and asks for something else instead. Something that is not expensive, Keiko won't miss, and Osaki can treasure it like a memory. Although there could be another reason for that toll. When we look at Keiko, played by Komaki Kurihara, it is obvious that she comes from a different background than Osaki. She is shocked how little Osaki eats and how she lives in a house filled with worms. Yet she manages to shake off her prejudice rather quickly and keep her mind open. Yes, she's adventurous, brave, and follows her dreams, but not over the limits. Actually, the idea to live with Osaki is not hers, but her husband's. And if he expressed that he does not wish for Keiko to go, then she wouldn't have probably gone. But for justification, we are still in the 70s, and it's hard to imagine a more independent portrayal of Keiko that would still be realistic. Keiko comes from a top privileged social class, as she's able to do a full-time study research. She has not in the slightest encountered the struggles Osaki had to go through, and even though they can manage to form a connection throughout the movie, she is still struck by the differences once she has to leave back for Tokyo. We can view Keiko as selfish for not leaving Osaki more money or even taking her with herself to Tokyo. But she actually did her a great favor by spending valuable time with her, listening to her, and then sharing her story and raising awareness about the past. Osaki's brother, as a young boy, is hot-tempered and runs away from his mother's second wedding. He is very close to his sister, and when he misses her departure, he even hurts himself badly. His transformation is astonishing, because when Osaki returns, his injury is still visible, and surely he remembers why he did it.
さあどうぞ。はい。
あ、これはうちの。
Also, Osaki gave him a great amount of money, with which he was able to build his house with, and that should mean he's grateful, which I think he at least partly is. That's why he isn't openly mean to Osaki. There is a paradox. On one hand, society tells him that he should hate Osaki, but on the other, she is also the reason why he is living so well. And he decides to solve his paradox by doing nothing. He pretends Osaki doesn't exist. He doesn't answer her questions, and he isn't talking to her much. He simply chooses to fade their relationship away, and he completely fails at being a brother to Osaki. The same thing happens with Osaki's son, who also isn't openly mean to her and even feels more gratitude towards her as he chooses to send her money every month, even though it's not a lot and it can come late. But apart from that, he pretends like she does not exist. It is suggested in the movie that he does so because of his wife. He moves Osaki away in order to be able to marry. But it still does not explain why doesn't he, for example, send her some letters or some gifts Osaki would be really happy about. Still, Osaki loves him very much and prays for him and his family every morning. Note that she does not pray for herself, which could mean she either does not think much about herself or she struggles to accept and love herself. Some of the interactions the two women share are non-verbal, but still they feel inviting, warm, and natural, and I would not mind being in them. Osaki has no idea who this foreign woman is and what she's doing in her house. But intuitively, she learns that Keiko means no harm to her. She requires no logical explanations, yet she manages to be vulnerable around her and share her story. That for me is the most feminine thing about this movie, because it opposes our era of immediate answers, results, but also reservedness. It really makes me speechless how well this is captured by the actresses and the camera. When Keiko is talking to the man in Borneo, he says, "It's a tough job for a woman." But Keiko argues, "No, it's only job for a woman." And I agree. I can't imagine a scenario where a man would be able to connect to Osaki the same way Keiko was able to, even considering the social norms of that time. Also, Osaki throughout her life was exploited by men many times, and she probably would not even want to share a story with a man. Based on all the points I have stated, it is obvious that I label this movie as a feministic one. But still, can there be even more evidence? Well, there's the so-called Bechdel's test that signify whether or not a movie has feministic values. Although there are only 3 really trivial questions, you would be surprised how many modern films actually fail this test. The first question is, the movie must have 2 named female characters. Second question, the characters must talk to each other. And third question, they must discuss something other than a man. Of course, this movie passes it. Now, let's look at how a feministic heroine looks and what values does she uphold. For this, I asked my friends, both Czech and Japanese, to see where their opinion is at. They differed, but they all expressed that either they believe or the society believes there's a stereotypical picture of feminists. She is too loud, too masculine, and criticizes men more than necessary. But also, on the other hand, they expressed that a feminist is following her dreams, fighting for the equality of both genders, and can be viewed as our heroine. So let's apply the negative things to Osaki first. I can imagine some hardcore conservatives might feel like she's being too loud when she refuses to be a prostitute, or when she cries at the end of the movie, which Keiko does too. However, we can say she's being initiative when at the beginning she decides to follow her dream by being able to provide money for her family by working abroad. Keiko is following her dream as well by doing this interview with Osaki, and she goes more far than an ordinary person would go. And the point of this talk with Osaki is to raise awareness about the lack of women's rights and the exploitation of their bodies. So it perfectly fits the narrative of female heroines. Kei Kumai has his own ways of showing his beliefs and critique in this movie. He shows us a scene where a political matter is discussed, and he leaves us to interpret it in our own ways. The prostitutes are listening to a man who's explaining why Japan wants to exploit Southeast Asian regions.
今や強愛なる国土と乏しい資源によりその発展を阻害されておる我が大日本帝国は当然海外への進出を促され北は満州南はジャワスマトラの各地までその発展の目を向けておる。
For a more profiting economy, they need more space, which is limited on the Japanese islands. And this imperialistic theory is really similar to the theory of Lebensraum in Nazi Germany. This is said after we learn that the Karayuki-san system was banned, because it's inhuman for such a modern state Japan had become. Also, it is no longer necessary for the booming economy. But isn't there a hidden symbolism? How Japan was exploiting women, and now, after not admitting any responsibility whatsoever, is exploiting whole nations? Wasn't this so-called modernity of Japan just a mere tatemae mask? We can also see a critique of post-war Japan, as Keiko is speaking to this blind man in Borneo who is complaining about Japanese companies still occupying Borneo's economy in the 70s.
Kami tidak suka sama orang Jepun. Jepun suka rampas orang punya tanah. Sekarang Jepun datang berniaga dan untungnya dia makan sendiri.
I love on this movie how we have the story of the author of the book, Tomoko Yamazaki, but even the director, Kei Kumai, is able to share his own beliefs. This movie is humanistic, as its main aim is to share the story of an exploited woman who was not considered important enough to be listened to, and for the society it was really easy to make her the main victim and transfer all the blame on her back and then let her be forgotten. Keiko, the reporter, is able to break through this by devoting her time to Osaki, and thanks to her, she will be remembered. It is also powerful when she goes to Borneo and she cleans the women's cemetery, signifying that they are no longer forgotten or unknown. This movie lies on the left side of the political spectrum because it criticizes Japanese imperialistic politics and capitalism. It is also against patriarchy, as the main men who are in Osaki's life are always above her and causing her great misfortune. Whereas in Keiko's case, who is a portrayal of an ideal modern woman, the men in her life are no longer controlling her and are more like on an equal level. I wouldn't say this movie is pacifistic because the topic of war and violence is not discussed much, but the director is surely not a big fan of it, as this movie contains barely any graphic scenes at all. How did the public accept this movie? In Japan and China, it became really popular and high-grossing. It was also introduced at the 25th Berlin International Film Festival, where it won the prize for Best Picture, Best Director and Best Actress for Kinuyo Tanaka. Along that, it won many other prizes and was almost nominated for an Oscar. This movie surely deserves it, as it manages to capture human emotions simply yet powerfully and effectively. I can imagine how some conservatives were shocked by this movie. But on the other hand, it had to change opinions of many who did not know much about this topic. And it also continues to raise awareness even today. I hope you liked my review. I hope you learned something new in whatever way that means to you. And I hope you have a nice day. Thank you for watching. I managed to get the ultimate Sandakan experience. Evelina, co ty děláš?